Thank you very much, Mr. President, distinguished colleagues. Ahmed Lawan, I represent Yobe North. Mr. President, I want to make some comments on the recommendations. These comments are of general nature. I, I believe that the Federal Ministry of Education in Nigeria has no national policy on out-of-school children. Mr. President, the National Council on Education must have a clearly spelled out national policy on out-of-school children. We have 20 million out-of-school children, and in fact, could be more. And this is a huge challenge to not only our educational sector, but our national security, Mr. President. So we should, when we consider the recommendations, we should urge the National Council on Education, where the Federal Ministry of Education, all the states, ministries of education, and the FCT are present to have a clearly defined national policy on out-of-school children. The second thing, Mr. President, in the recommendations is recommendation 5, where that's on page 7, where our committee, and I must commend the committee for a very good job, is talking about the release of funds for dealing with this issue. I think based on what we should know better, we should appropriate. We should not leave this matter in the hands of the Federal Ministry of Education alone. Our committee on basic education particularly should engage. And then in the 2025 appropriation bill, something tangible, something meaningful and reasonable and significant should be made available. Lastly, Mr. President and distinguished colleagues, we are talking of feeding, the school feeding program. I, from my experience, and of course those who are in the 9th National Assembly, would tell you that that program was abused, grossly abused. Even when COVID kept everybody in their residences, expenditures were incurred on feeding people who were not in schools. That means that the program is prone to abuse and manipulation. So we need to look at how to make it foolproof if we must continue with the school feeding program. Thank you very much, Mr. President.
I represent Bayelsa West. Firstly, I want to commend the very thorough work done by our committee that has been presented to us, and also commend the efforts of distinguished Senator Adebule, who raised this as a very urgent matter, and indeed a very serious issue of national concern. Mr. President, general comments and then few remarks on the recommendations. The crisis facing our educational system is at the core of insecurity, is at the core of leadership failure, is at the core of a lot of issues affecting the development of this country. And one of the most important contributions this Senate can make in our national development efforts is to ensure that we get to the root of this. Not just addressing the issue of out-of-school children, which is very important, but also the crisis facing the educational system generally. All of us who went to schools 30, 40, 50 years ago know the kind of education that was available. Available for the rich as well as the poor. There was a time when students from all over Africa and even beyond took pride in coming to this country to attend our universities, primary, secondary, and tertiary. So, Mr. President, as we discuss this issue, let's not limit our contributions only to the issue of out-of-school children. Very important, but we should use this opportunity, in my view, to undertake a comprehensive overview of the crisis facing our educational system. And bearing in mind the fact that, rightly so, in our federal system, the issue of education is on the concurrent list. Yes, it's on the concurrent list. So there's not much really by way of legislative intervention that we can do. Yes, we have a role to play, and which is why in the area of recommendation, Mr. President, I think we should not get tired. We should rise to the occasion and have a conversation with the leader of the executive arm. I suggest that the time has come, if it's not even too late, but it's never too late to try. We should move for a national conference, kind of. Maybe not a conference, but a summit. We need a summit where you have the stakeholders at the sub-national levels. And it will be nice, Mr. President, if this Senate and the National Assembly under your leadership will take the lead in this. Because this issue is at the core of insecurity. For those of us who have had an opportunity to serve at other levels, we know the differences we made by investments in education, by building schools as we did, by introducing even boarding schools for the first time for some of us as I did, by introducing the Tertiary Education Loans Board, which happily, Mr. President, has replicated at the federal level. That's why I enthusiastically supported it. By introducing the Education Development Trust Fund in my state, where a compulsory levy was put, and the various schools, primary, secondary, and making even feeding, even clothing, free in those schools.
30 seconds left.
So this is, with what we have, we know what investing in education can do beyond putting people in schools, beyond building manpower, beyond creating future qualified, competent leaders. We are also addressing security problems. So my suggestion, lastly, before I take my seat, Mr. President, is that you should lead, have a conversation with the president and address, it's already starting to address it by the Students' Loan Board, which is going a long way in enabling students to access education. But let us have a summit where the governors, who are the heads of the sub-regional levels, will also be there with their own commissioners and policymakers, so that we can formulate a coherent national strategy. And then we can, as Senate President Emeritus said, back it up with appropriate legislation. Right now, there are states, unfortunately, in this country, unfortunately, where even with the monies available in UBEC, they can't pay their counterpart funds to access. This country has a framework for managing most of these things. But look at the UBEC funds. There are some states, incidentally, those are the states that are highly even implicated in the area of communal crisis and insecurity and banditry and so on. Because there's a clear link between investing in education and stability of our communities and our society and our country also. So, Mr. President, I think this is beyond education. It's beyond out-of-school children. You should take the lead and let the president be briefed and the state governors, so that we can all sit down as a country and fashion out an educational system that will work for all of us. Thank you very much. I do appreciate.
West Senatorial District. Mr. President, let me also join my colleague in commending the committee for a job well done, but with some reservation. Mr. President, before I go into just the document that is before us, I strongly believe that there are some salient issues which we should ask ourselves. And I know for a known fact that the government, successive administration has done a lot in the educational sector. Even from the content of the reports, where you observe from the activities before the observation and the recommendation, it shows the committee in this document also show the effort of the government that has been done regarding the out-of-school children. But we are not looking at one important areas which all of us should ask questions about, which is at the subnational level. There are a lot of effort. For instance, the universal basic education, which you've just mentioned. Mr. President, the rule about the universal basic education is that the government will provide certain part of the fund, while the state government will complement. But we have billions of naira lying fallow at the universal basic education, with the state unable to come up with their own counterpart funding to address all these menace we have under the out-of-school children. They cannot come up with the fund. And the federal government every year, because universal basic education in the budgetary allocation is on a first-line charge. It's a first-line charge item. So the federal government is providing their fund, but the subnationals are not coming up with their own counterpart funding, which is a problem. So, Mr. President, I want to say that the government is doing a lot of efforts. It's been, as contained in this report, the identification and the exercise carried out alone identify about 24,000 out-of-school children between 2021 and 2023. About 1 million enrollment has been done regarding the out-of-school children, as contained in this report. As contained in this report. While the report also raises the challenges that is confronting, but in their recommendation, some of the challenges that were raised, they were silent on it. And this is one area I want us to look at. I will give you, for instance, Mr. President, if you look at page he said, on page 4, he said the major factors responsible for the spate of the out-of-school children. He said, number 1, educational demand barriers, issues around poverty and lack of resources to enroll children in school and socio-cultural norms, tradition, and beliefs. 2, he said educational supply barriers, non-availability of sufficient classroom, deficit of qualified teachers, particularly in rural areas, teachers, guides, and learning materials from the government. As we go to their recommendation, they were silent on some of these important items they have identified as the major barriers. So, Mr. President, I want to agree that yes, this is a menace in our hand which we need to tackle. But at the same time, we need to do more at the subnational level, because this is where it all started. As we speak, payment of the salaries of primary school teachers, even their areas, are domiciled with the local government authorities. It's with them. So I think the subnational should do more in this regard. We should not put all problems, everything, at the doorstep of the federal government. Federal government is to come up with a national policy that will cover every areas regarding these out-of-school children, but we should call on the subnationals as well to do more to assist in this regard. So thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you. Let me add a
comment in respect to this report. First of all, let me commend the committee led by Senator Lawan Usman for a wonderful job. They did a good work in putting together this report. I commend them for doing so. And I feel compelled to make my comment in respect to this report, because the issue is really grave. It's a serious problem that if we leave it unattended to, it's a kind of time bomb. And once the bomb explodes, it's going to consume us, particularly the northern part of this country. because the number of children that roam our streets without going to schools is really something that needs our attention. It's a serious problem, serious problem. And it's a problem that is beyond, the solution is beyond the federal government alone or any type of government. It should have an all-inclusive attention. State governments, local government, federal government, traditional rulers, religious leaders, and even parents, everyone, because everyone has a role to play. And I feel happy that the committee concluded by saying addressing the issue of out-of-school children in Nigeria demands concerted joint efforts of government at all levels, national, state, and local, traditional rural parents, development partners, and so on and so forth. Because federal government can't do it alone. State government cannot do it alone. Everyone has to come together. Everybody should come together. And when you go to the lowest level, the parents, there must be reorientation of those who feel that schools or education is not important. Let them understand. And the parents also, they should be reoriented, they should have a reorientation in respect to knowing the fact that being parents, they have that duty on them to make sure that they train their children in the proper manner, prescribe the two religions, the two prominent religions we have in this country, both Islam and Christianity. It really, gives that responsibility onto the parents to make sure that they take care of their children. So allowing kids to be roaming the streets in the first place is not something that is accepted by Islam. Without, giving them the proper care, it's not something that is accepted by Christianity. That has to be said loud and clear. The reorientation has to commence immediately so that parents will know that they need to do that. Then, of course, there should be an arrangement as clearly spelled out by Senator Dixon and Senator Solomon for the whole stakeholders to sit down and find out a solution to this problem.
30 seconds.
So I say submit, Mr. President.
I thank you for adhering.
Mr. President, let me start by going down the memory lane. As far back as the year 2000, the Universal Basic Education was launched by President Olusegun Obasanjo in Sokoto. Why Sokoto? Sokoto happens to be one of the most educationally disadvantaged states. And of course, the surrounding states like my own in Kebbi, Zamfara, down to Katsina, and what have you. The whole idea is to get everybody going to school, right from the age of 5 up to 15. That's why we said universal basic education, primary, and also junior secondary school. And huge sums of money are budgeted every year. And counterpart funds were required by the state government. And unfortunately, Mr. President, in our constitution, like it's been said by other contributors, education is on the concurrent legislative list, where state and federal government can legislate. But we know that primary education, if you look at the constitution properly, rests with the local government councils. And we know what's happening to the local government council today. Their money is not being given to them. We debated here severally. Even on the 9th Senate, there was even a legislation we made that money should be released directly to the councils. Unfortunately, it didn't see the light of the day. So there is very little the local government council can do. Now, everything rests with the state government. Some of them are not even interested in accessing the fund from the UBEC. Like Adola said, billions are now waiting. And Mr. President, we should make it very clear. States that are not interested in accessing this money should be given to other states that are interested. we can't allow the money to be lying waste. Some states have even passed legislation making it compulsory for every child to be in school. But unfortunately, they lack, the ability to enforce the legislation. And once there is no enforcement, nothing happens. And I agree with all those that said that out-of-school children is like an elephant in the room. It is the biggest security risk we have in the country. To be honest, I want to state very clear that Nigeria is the only country in the world where we have over 20 million out-of-school children. Over 20 million. This has been said by the United Nations, and it has been said by National Bureau of Statistics. It has been confirmed by Federal Ministry of Education. But what have we done to really address the problem? So I agree that there should be a national conference on this. Let us call the governors, let us call our legislators, let us call our businessmen and sit under one roof and discuss this issue. It is so serious that we have to tackle it with all seriousness, Mr. President. Thank you very much.
Thank you. This is Senator Bang.
I commend the report, but it wasn't all-encompassing enough. We have been talking about the issues of out-of-school children since the MDG goals. Goal number 2, MDG 2015 to 2030 was talking about 2000 to 2015 was talking about goal number 2 was about education. SDG goal 4 and 5 were talking about quality education and gender equality. These are key elements that should be captured in the report. And the principal driver of the MDG goals and the SDG goals were about 3 key elements. The EFA goals: equity, quality, and access. These are the primers and the movers of reducing the issue and the impact of out-of-school children. It's just a manifestation of a deeper problem. And until we are able to establish the propelling factors that drive children out of school, we will not be addressing the problem. In those days, the government is responsible for exercise books, textbooks, instructional materials, quality teachers. The school environment is made attractive. But today, go to our primary schools and secondary schools, they are just a shadow of themselves, and they don't really inspire our young ones to go to school. So I think the report should be enlarged to encompass all the issues that will help us in understanding the phenomena. Secondly, the issue of lack of coordination between the national and subnational levels is very critical. Because if you want to address the issue of education, it has to be in a holistic manner, taken with drive, and such that every part of Nigeria will be a stakeholder in the process. So I think one very important element that we have to address is the issue of effective coordination between the nationals and subnationals. Be that as may, I appreciate the effort of the committee, and I look forward to a deeper and more specific report that will deal with the issues that I highlighted. Thank you, sir.
Ago, Bill Clinton, former president of America, had to come to Nigeria. What was he coming to do? He was concerned about the plight of out-of-school children. He particularly said, we are sitting on time bomb. Today we are already seeing the time bomb addressing these issues. Some people will say it is from federal, some people will say from the state. Coming as a former governor, I think it is from the states. I say this because of out of experience, sir. Federal government have done everything, a lot. They have done a lot. When we attempted Al-Majiri school, taking back children, compulsorily forcing them to go to school, it ended with a religious dimension, and it died down. They are back to Al-Majiri streets. They introduced Agile program, especially for the female ones. Only very few states, even with the World Bank funds, are bringing counterpart funds. I take a dimension from the last one that we did. Mr. President, you have done your best, even commenting every time about actions on local government funds. Today, we are still seeing a different thing, like they mentioned. At one time, when we were governors, we recommended to the president, we say you must take some compulsion. You must do some compulsory measures. What was the time when he attempted? President Buhari attempted one. When parish funds came, parish, what do they call it? Parish funds came. He made it a priority that all those that have not accessed the UBEC funds in respect to education, in your state, it was, first of all, a priority. They will remove it and access compulsorily for you to go and address those issues. Then the remaining balance, they will tell you, come and collect. Today, sir, we have a lot of certain things, even without parish club. We have subsidy palliatives. We have so much funds going to the states, but they are not addressing the issue of education. Mr. President should also take bold steps to take a decision. Any palliative that is going to a state, and that state has challenges of educational funding, especially accessing SUBE funds, what they will do is to say, okay, first priority, we are taking this to access your SUBE fund. Go and address the issue of out-of-school children. Otherwise, we'll continue to do the same thing. We'll introduce so many measures and it will go in vain. We are looking forward to one day that this country will agree with Mr. President that direct funding will go to local governments so that they will address this matter. I thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you. And Senator Sani Musa.
My name is Mohammed Sani Musa, representing Niger East Senatorial District. My distinguished colleagues, this is a very important issue. For too long, we have been talking about out-of-school children. We have been talking about UBEC. We have been talking about how we will change our educational system. And for too long, we will continue to be talking if necessary action is not done. If you look at the high socio-economic imbalances we have in this country today, if you look at state governments, this problem is not just today. This problem has been there. Lip services have been paid to the issue of education. Today you go to other, even African countries today, you will see how they manage their primary schools. If you see their primary schools, they are no different with the tertiary universities we have, tertiary institutions we have in Nigeria. Go to Morocco and come back and see how their primary schools are. See the kind of skills they give to their children. And we are here, we are leaders, but we every day stand to pay lip services to these issues. When funds are appropriated, when state governments are asked to give their counterpart, or when federal governments or World Bank, why should we even be taking money from World Bank to fund our primary education in this country? We embezzle the money. It's shameful. Go to see secondary schools, go to see primary schools. Not in one state, in all the states of this country. But every time we sit down, we go and look at reports upon reports every time, and we are not doing anything about it. I will recall when they said in the northern Nigeria, the Almajiri system, the schools that we have, they are going to, the convention, they are going to bring them up and put them together under the conventional system. They did as if it's going to work. Budget was made for all those purposes and nothing was done. If we want to go further, if we want to move forward, we need to change and create some innovations to our primary school curriculum. Today, it's not about school feeding that will make children to go to school. No. When you give a contractor and he's giving them Indomie and one egg, and you think that is what will make them to go to school? Go to China and see little things that attract children to school. And those things that are attracting those children to school are also giving those children some kind of insight on how to innovate. This is what we need. We said we should ensure free education, basic education. That is primary school education. In 2024, we are talking of tens of thousands of little children out of school. This is very shameful. So I think this report is not enough for us to tackle this issue. We must address these things head on. State governors have to come to the table and be honest about taking care of this thing. Why should even federal government be involved in funding primary education? Why should it be? So, Mr. President, sir, this report, I believe if we should follow it up, take all the inputs that a lot of senators have made here and challenge ourselves to seeing that this works. Because if you don't give that foundation, if you don't give that basic foundation, our educational system will be rubbished. As it is today, you see somebody with master's degree, tell him to write one statement, he cannot do it. So what foundation are we putting? This is my contribution.
How did he get the masters?
Well, I can't answer that question, but I will ask Senator Sani later, and I will inform you when I come to your office. My contribution. On this floor, I've been consistent for 6 years today that our pathway to development in this country is just pay attention to our educational system and our healthcare system. Those are the key pillars that will move us. Mr. President, my distinguished colleagues, I think that we are not paying the required attention to education. Yes, federal government is trying, like my colleague said, but what are we budgeting for education? Less than 8% in the last budget. Kenya has moved its budget to 30%. Now, that is federal government. Interestingly, education is in the concurrent list. Therefore, state governments and local governments should have a higher role to play in enhancing our educational system. Mr. President, my distinguished colleagues, I beg to say here that we need a total turnaround for our educational philosophy in this country. What we are doing, people going for paper education, not ready to learn any skill, is not helping us. We've had policies to try to drive this problem, but it's not working. But we have no option. We must go back. What kind of education do we need for our people? We need functional education. Everybody mustn't have a degree. Let's pay attention to basic skills and let people see the value of why they are going to school to get something. And when they have a certificate, they have a job to do that can give them money that will be useful to them. Therefore, Mr. President and my distinguished colleagues, I do think that we should declare an emergency for our education in this country, where all stakeholders, from up to the grassroots level, including community leaders, must be involved, and we must all take ownership. If we don't do this, we cannot move to where we need to move to, because that is our basic first path to development. Thank you very much, Mr. President.
Sani Bello, representing Niger North. Mr. President, I have listened with attention to all the contributions. But I think under this democratic setup, there must be a change of ideas, and we must have the courage. Mr. President, you were once a governor. From my own little assessment and from what I have seen so far, we can sit here and discuss all the problems. I think we know what the problems are. But I think the implementation is where the problem is. Mr. President, a politician, for example, let's say a governor, for example, would rather invest money in building bridges, roads, something he can show. Is a major problem. Education, investment in education is not something you see immediately. The gestation period for investment in education takes a long time. You can invest in education today, you probably won't see the value until 10 years, 5 years from day of investment. So in our setup, political setup, especially someone that is looking for second term, he wants to invest in projects that he can show immediately. Mr. President, that will not solve our education problem. We must get the courage to invest in education, regardless of what people will say. To give you an example, in Niger State, when I was governor, we have 56 boarding schools. We have schools without toilets, schools without dining hall, schools without fence. You can't get good leaders out of system like this. We all came out of good system. In some cases, we've lost students due to lack of toilets. They have to go to the forest at night to ease themselves, and they're bitten by snakes. So what I decided was not to renovate, but to start rebuilding the schools, which cost a lot of money, Mr. President. A lot to fence and do toilets, build dining halls, fix their roofs, was costing over $1 billion for each school. We didn't have the money. But thank God we're able to do 9. And if that was a program that continued, government after government, maybe one day. But you see, the maintenance culture must continue. Because if you renovate a school today, because there are children, if you don't keep on the maintenance, after 1 year, you go back to square one. So, Mr. President, in short, this is a very serious problem that I think the federal and state governors need to sit down, forget re-election for now, invest in education. Nobody will see it, but in future, you see it. I can't imagine a school where all girls school cannot go to toilet, they have to ease themselves in front of their dormitory for fear of being bitten by snakes. Imagine the health hazard and the stench smell. So, Mr. President, I agree with all the intervention, but I think our conscience should judge us. Anybody that is in position today, I believe, was in school 30, 40 years ago, where in some cases, even in school, we're giving money for train. So, Mr. President, that's my intervention. I think we need to do more. I think there should be more discussion, roundtable discussion between the subnationals and the federal government. Even the issue of UBEC, Senator Lalong mentioned, is true. Some states have not accessed their UBEC funds for many years. In some cases, when they access, they divert it for something else. So I think there must be a robust discussion between the subnationals and the federal government to address this problem. Thank you, Mr. President.
I looked at the report to take today. The last submission by Governor Bello is a bit scary. Our children are dying because of lack of toilets, and then they struggle to go to the bush even in the night, and they are bitten by snakes. It's not something we should hear in the 21st century, but it's a reality. And that calls to question the activities of the various subnationals, because I haven't seen any primary school that one would say belongs to federal government. There is no federal government primary school, for instance. And over and above that, our committees in the Senate should be able to do more to visit these schools, take pictures, and make periodic reports. The Senate leader, we must have reports from committees. We must have quarterly report from committees so that we can assess what is going on and build on those reports. If we need to go on retreat, we need to go on roundtable discussions with all concerned stakeholders, we do so. Because I'm aware that in some states, children are sitting on the floor to obtain education, particularly at the primary school level. And there are some states that I saw where children were sitting inside water. Inside water. They carry their chairs they bring in their chairs from home, and then they put inside water because the classroom is flooded, and they sit inside there and they are getting education. So we would like to see such reports, and we would like to debate, and we would like to particularize those institutions, and then we would like to focus attention on ameliorating the plight of those children. I can tell you that unless we do proper oversight functions, it's not enough for us to charter plane to Sokoto to go and look at the road, the Badagry-Sokoto road. We should also be able to charter plane to go and look at a primary school in Nyanya or anywhere, but we are not doing that. So it's everybody's fault. The federal government may be doing enough, but if the idea of counterpart funding has become a problem, that those monies are lying waste for over 10 to 15 years, then we may have to think of whether to remove the idea of counterpart funding so that states can access those funds for the sake of our future. Because this is our future, direct correlation with security of the nation, as you pointed out. So maybe we just take two more, and then we go. So we take Senator. You speak last, Chief Whip. Senator Neda, you've been raising your hand. After that, Senator Mongunu, then we close.
Thank you, Mr. President, distinguished colleagues. I'm from Edo South Senatorial District, and I'm very happy, Mr. President, for giving me this privilege to contribute to this debate on out-of-school children. Mr. President, I completely and totally align myself with most of the speakers, if not all of them. But I'm particularly happy because, as you yourself noticed, the federal government does not own primary schools. Primary schools belong to the local government, and we know that the role of the state governors so far to stifle the existence and functionality of these local governments have also contributed to the lack of access to quality schools, primary schools. As we all will agree, education is the basic rock of our society, and we must all put everything in place to make sure that we enjoy quality education. Mr. President, I completely agree that we should have a national summit to be headed by your humble self. I say so because you do have an experience as a former governor, and I know hitherto to you becoming the governor, your state, Akpabio State, was not doing very well in education. But you visited that issue very squarely, and today, Akpabio ranks one of those states that are doing so well in education. And in spite of your contribution to education, you did other things. So for me, I'm also happy that former governors are here, and they're all telling us of their experiences while they were governors. But hopefully, though, they will be able to, as we draw from their experiences, those governors who are sitting will also hear from us. Because the issue of a second tenure, yes, if you ask for if you do other things to secure a second tenure, what do you then do when you now have that second tenure? That 4 years that you have is enough for you to attack education and make sure that it's done squarely. So I would say that not until we pay attention to salaries for teachers, incentives for them to do their work properly, building of new schools and boarding houses, because boarding houses is where characters are formed. Boarding houses is where leaderships are formed. Boarding houses is where you have school prefects, house prefects, and the rest, and these are leaders of their various institutions that grow up to be leaders of the society. We must pay attention to that and to dilapidated buildings that we find all around our schools.
Thank you. Thank you.
Mr. President, yes, finally, like I said, we urge you to take the leadership in this, question, to lead this summit so that we can bring all the governors and all those who are in this industry to help us to agree and to forge a way forward. Not until we do that, Mr. President, we'll be dancing around as if it's an issue going back and forth. Thank you, Mr. President, for this
Thank
opportunity.
you. We appreciate you, Senator.
Mohamed Tahir Monguno. I represent Borno North Senatorial District. Why I persisted for Mr. President to recognize me and speak on this matter is, in the course of the debate, I recalled with a deep sense of nostalgia how I was enrolled into school and retained in school to the extent of qualifying as a lawyer. Mr. President, distinguished senators, let me narrate my own personal story of enrollment into school.
Senator Isunazo.
In school is, I think I will commend the traditional method of enrollment in my own area that was in practice.
Senator Nedwoko, please, one Senate.
Then the ward head will be directed
Senator Lalong,
by the Education Authority to identify children of school age in each home. The ward head, because he knows all the people in his ward, and he knows all the houses that have school age children. That way, in our house, myself and my twin brother, who is now late, were identified as of school age, and he reported to the school authority. Then, the following year, a messenger came, and we were taken to school. Our father could not object, because if he objects, there are appropriate sanctions that will go with it. We are enrolled into school possibly by identification by the ward head. And then, how I was retained in school. Distinguished senators, Mr. President, it was a boarding school. In fact, I don't want to even come on holiday because the food that I was given in school is better than the food that I eat at home. Because of that, whenever we are going on holiday, I wear sad face because I am missing this good food that I eat in school. When we come on holiday, I'm looking forward to go back to school to eat that good food. So I think it's a very good method of not only enrolling people into school, but also a method of retaining people in school. One, by identifying children of school age in each home, forcefully enrolling them, and also retaining them with all the comfort that ordinarily that they don't get at home. I think
Senator,
I will commend.
Senator Asukwa,
I will commend that method.
Listen to his life experience.
I will commend that method to the authorities today. Well, the school feeding program that is now being done is not the best. It's not the best because I can recall that Nido, I was given Nido, I was given banana, I was given rice and beans, and I don't wash my clothes. It was washed and then pressed and given to me, and I was given pocket money as I'm going back to school.
And you still miss those days.
Yes, and I still miss those days. No, I'm not missing those days now, because I now eat good food, and I have the education. I'm not missing those good days. So, Mr. President, distinguished senators, I think I will commend that method to further energize our school feeding program to make it more attractive so that it can retain children in school. Thank you.
Yeah. Every word that comes from the mouth of an elder is something we can use to work on, legislate on, and move the country forward. This issue of out-of-school children is one of the most important and a major source of insecurity in this country. 20 million children that are out of school is a time bomb for any country. Already we are experiencing banditry. And of course, I also want to thank Senator Ndubueze. Senator, if you want to talk about appropriation, take him outside. I just have to mention your names one by one now so that you know that here you have the decorum in the Senate. There is decorum in the Senate. I'm not impressed that people are not listening to one another. So why will he speak and others listen to him? When it is his turn, he is engaging you in appropriation discussion. Please, let's be serious here. This is a very important topic. I allowed 1 hour, 30 minutes, because if we can solve the problem of out-of-school children in Nigeria, over 20 million children that are out of school, those are potential bandits. Major danger. You can send your children to Cambridge, send your children to Harvard. They can't come back home. You can stay here as a senator, and your house is occupied by bandits at home. I have colleagues who are now ministers who have not been to some places in Borno for 5 years. They build houses, abandon those houses. It started from this out-of-school children issue. So that's why I allowed us to discuss it. It's a very major issue. So let us look at the recommendations and see where it falls short. We add, we amend, or we bring up an addition that can at least help us to make our input towards resolving these issues. Senator Goje, Senator Bello, Senator Lalong, and distinguished Senator Dixon, and a few others here with me, we've had the privileges of being governors in our various states. And we know that primary school education, basic education, belongs to even local government, assisted by the states. The salaries of primary school teachers are paid by local governments. That is why we applaud the Supreme Court decision that monies meant for local governments should go direct to local governments. It should not be withheld, deducted, and used for other sources. So it's our job now as legislators to give verve to the Supreme Court decision. And like the Attorney General of the Federation said, I was in Calabar the other day when somebody stood up to give a lecture castigating the Supreme Court and all that, and I refuse to make comment because if you are not satisfied with the Supreme Court decision, you go to God. The Supreme Court has spoken, and it is our business to obey the Supreme Court. In the legislature, it's our business to tinker and work around the laws to make sure that that decision of the Supreme Court is not in vain. So these out-of-school children, if we have to make a legislation on it national, we must do so. So please, let's be very, very serious about this. You have children. They can't come back from abroad after all the investment and they die without knowing why. Because a group of bandits will lay them on the road, rape them, kill them, and then you don't know why they are dying. They are dying because you failed to do the basic. You failed to send your neighbor's child to school. When I was a governor, I declared free and compulsory education for all Nigerian children who found their ways into Akpabio. Paid their WAEC fees, their NAPTIC fees, everything. Compulsory. And I had education monitors. From 8 in the morning, they go around. If they see a child that is hawking, they'll pick up the child, go and arrest the parents. And there were consequences, 6 months imprisonment for any parent or guardian. They allowed a child of school age not to be in school. So if we can replicate that nationally, I think we can solve the problem. We had to build over 6,000 new classroom blocks because of the influx of students. My state was regarded as we had this house boy, house girl syndrome. When I declared free and compulsory education, you could not see any acquired person selling groundnut in Lagos. So this is a very serious issue. You go to Kano and you see the number of children who are outside. If the state governments can take action backed by federal government, then something will be done. If we are not able to access you beg forms, you beg forms, then we should remove the idea of counterpart funding and then send those monies to, what is the point of keeping billions and billions and billions for over 10 years on the ground that states could not access? We must take this issue very seriously. This is the core of the insecurity in this country. Recommendation 1.
Mr. President, point of order. Sorry, Mr. President and my dear colleagues. I hope contributions we have all made. And we all now understand even much more the seriousness of this issue and the need for cross-fertilization of ideas across different stakeholder levels and authority levels. I do not see any purpose that will be served if we take these recommendations as stated. My suggestion will be, with all due respect, that at this point, we call for a summit. And let us meet, facilitated by you and Mr. President, after you have briefed him. And then let the stakeholders meet and look at all those issues. So at this point, therefore, my suggestion, my advice is that we take only one prayer, one resolution calling for a national summit as a matter of national urgency. I so move.
Yes, Deputy Senate President.
The unanimous views of all, may I move an amendment to the recommendations of our committee to read as follows, that in view of the seriousness of the issue of out-of-schools syndrome in Nigeria and its implications for national development, and realizing also the fact that different levels of stakeholders need to come together to fashion out a lasting solution to this, that this Senate calls for a national summit after briefing the leader of the executive arm. I so move.
Recognizing me to second this very, very important motion. I, Barrow Jibrin, cannot not. I stand to second the motion, the beautiful motion, ably moved by the former governor of Bayelsa State, Senator Dixon. I so second, Mr. President.
Distinguished colleagues, a motion has been moved after the robust debate on the issue of out-of-school children and the beautiful report presented before us by our Committee on Basic Education, that we jettison the various recommendations and then encompass all into one, that this Senate do resolve to have a national summit on the issue of out-of-school children to involve the federal government of Nigeria, the state governments, the local governments, the traditional rulers, the parents, development partners, civil society organizations, and all major stakeholders in the concern in the educational sector to bring a holistic solution to the menace of out-of-school children in Nigeria. That motion has been supported by the Deputy Senate President. And those in support of the motion say aye. And those against say nay. The ayes have it. I want to just thank my colleagues for taking this matter very seriously. I apologize to the chief whips. The chief whip, I had to take over your job to call our colleagues to order because of the seriousness of what we were discussing, so that we know, because this is clearly the future of Nigeria. And I pray that through the national summit, the resolutions will be implemented, issues will be well highlighted, and then all efforts will be made to bring this menace to an end so that our children can have a better future and not an adulthood in banditry, an adulthood in Boko Haram, an adulthood in fraud. I thank you all.